and welcome to another motor track test, where today we have a pair of Mustangs. In the grey corner, a V8 GT, in the blue corner, a 2.3 litre high performance, both fitted with 10-speed automatics. Question is, which is quickest and which is more fun? I'll run you through the specs of each, take them for a drive and then set a lap time, so hit the time codes below if you want to skip ahead. While you're down there, like the video, subscribe to the channel and leave us a comment as to whether you're Team Turbo or Team V8. In the GT, 5 litre V8 with 339 kilowatts and 556 newton meters, but it does weigh 1,770 kilograms. 2.3 litre high performance on the other hand, 2.3 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder, producing 236 kilowatts and 448 newton meters, and it weighs 1,705 kilograms. So, more powerful, lighter, which is going to have the upper hand? Let's start in this one. So the basic specs hinted at it, but now I can go into a bit more detail about why the 2.3 high performance is quite a different car to the EcoBoost. So the project started when a bunch of engineers from Ford said, what happens if we put the more powerful Focus RS engine in a Mustang EcoBoost? They liked the results, so project got the green light. So while this doesn't quite have Focus RS power, they dropped the compression ratio, put a bigger turbo on it. That got a little bit more power, a little bit more torque, but it's the chassis that's really had the biggest going over. So the brakes are from the American spec Mustang GT, the V8. Aussie Mustang GTs, which we'll drive in a moment, get performance pack brakes, so they're bigger again. Whereas this has smaller brakes, but still bigger than the EcoBoost. We've got thicker anti-roll bars. We've got a shorter diff ratio, which is part of a performance pack in the US. We've still got Pirelli P0 tyres, not the Michelins from the Mustang GT, and we also don't have staggered rims. We've got 19x9s at both ends. We've got better suspension, bigger brakes, more power, shorter diff, so it's quite a comprehensive upgrade. Obviously you pay for that. It's what, early 50s this car, probably about 55 grand on road, whereas an EcoBoost was about high 40s, so we're probably looking at about 5 or 6 grand more expensive, but it is a more serious proposition. This car's fitted obviously with the 10-speed automatic. That makes it even with the GT we've got here, but I ran a 2.3 high performance manual for a while, and I've got to say the manual worked really, really well with this car. It was just a great package. Worked really well on road, worked well on track. The gear ratios were a good match to the engine, had lots of torque, the shift was pretty good. Whereas the auto, it's fine, but it takes away a little bit of the character because this car, with the 4-cylinder engine, doesn't quite have the character of the V8. But it must be said that the auto, with its 10 gears, does make better use of the power because we've got 10 gears to work with instead of 6. So at the moment, I've got it in a racetrack mode, which gives me a bit of extra steering weight, stiffens up the suspension, sharpens the throttle, and makes it feel pretty fun actually. Backs off the ESP as well. As you can see, I can sort of almost throttle steer it. I've said it before on these videos, but the racetrack ESP mode in these latest Mustangs is really, really good. Really good. Honestly, one of those systems that, if it comes in, you've probably lost time anyway. So let's have a bit of a deep dive into what this thing's like to drive. Already, gearbox is annoying me a little bit because it's being very conservative on the downshifts. There, I was about 4,000 RPM, wanted a down change, didn't give it to me. It's not the end of the world because we've got lots of torque. There you go, even in third gear, it wants to over-rotate. I'll have to manage that a bit on the fast lap. But yeah, the gearbox needs to be more responsive. But we can just go a gear higher and use the torque like that. Yep, good pickup. The engine is, now let's be honest, the engine's pretty uninspiring. It's powerful, this is a pretty quick car. The US claims there's something ridiculous like 4.5 seconds on premium fuel, which is crazy. But I reckon this thing would probably dip under 6 to 100. It's still got enough power, crucially, to influence the chassis. That's something that the old EcoBoost didn't really have. It was still fun in its own way, but it almost had more chassis than engine, which could make it a little bit dull, especially on the road actually. Whereas this car not only has the chassis upgrades, but the extra torque, the fact that there's more torque and more power over a wider range, comes in earlier, stays later, means that, yeah, you can really influence the car with the throttle, which in any rear drive car makes it a lot more enjoyable. So I'm starting to get a bit of ESP intervention because I'm driving a bit sloppy, but that's okay. Let's turn it off and have a play with this thing and see what it does. There we go, ESC off. So like I said, engine a bit uninspiring just because, you know, it's got enough power, it's got enough torque, but it's not the best soundtrack really. It doesn't have any of the pops or bangs or anything like that. There we go, third gear, bit of oversteer, look at, hey, now we're talking. It's still quite a heavy car, even though it's lighter than the V8 by about 70 kilos, 65, 70 kilos. It's still about 1,700 kilos before you put like a driver in it, but it's also a lot of fun. Yeah, there is a bit of understeer balance, a bit of front end push into these corners, but crucially you can solve it. That is fun. And that's the big thing. People look down on the 4-cylinder Mustang, but this is an enjoyable car to drive because it's got a good chassis on it. People still give, you know, muscle cars, American cars crap because they're not meant to go around corners. Well, the Mustang's always been a pretty decent handling car. Obviously, it's not a sports car necessarily, but it gives you options. Yes, the front end pushes a little bit, but if I back off mid-corner, it'll tuck the nose in, which helps me rotate the car. Bit of throttle there, I can steer the rear. It's throttle steerable. I can chuck it round. There you go. Actually, it feels reasonably light on its feet, which is good. And the power to grip ratio is such that I can throttle steer it without losing too much time. There you go, it doesn't really have the power to necessarily just there we go, it needs a bit of a flick. As for how fast it's going to be, I'm not sure, we'll find that out in a moment. But I think these laps are going to be fun, if nothing else. And that's kind of the point of this thing. I'll try and throw it around now and see if we can, you know, have some fun. There you go. Hasn't really got the power to just power oversteer. It tends to just push into understeer because it's got more traction than it can really overcome, at least in third gear. But give it a bit of a flick and it doesn't mind a skid at all. It's not a car that you can really, you know, trail into the corner either. It's almost, there we go, eventually we get oversteer. But really it needs a flick to give its best. But once you settle it there, it's pretty friendly. Does go quite quickly, does go into oversteer quite suddenly when it does move, but equally pretty easy to control. See, the problem I think a lot of people have with this car is Mustang just means V8. I know there's been 4-cylinder Mustangs forever, but Mustang just means V8, at least here in Australia. Whereas if this thing had a different badge on it, people would absolutely rave about it. You look at the specs of this car, 236 kilowatts, 448 Newton meters, less than 6 seconds to 100, you know, 6-speed manual, decent brakes, yada, yada, yada. Like for me, if this thing had a Capri badge, like imagine if Ford, imagine the headlines if they said Ford was bringing back the Capri and it had this spec sheet. People would go nuts for it. But because it's a Mustang, people are like, oh, no, it should have a V8. So what does that solve? Doesn't really solve anything. But I think that you shouldn't get too snobby about what's written on the back. However, let's stick the helmet on, go for a lap time, and then we can swap into the V8 and see how that compares. no mucking about, straight into racetrack mode, straight into ESP off in the Mustang GT. Woohoo! That's a bit exciting. So what are the differences? We've got an extra 20mm of rubber at the back, we've got Michelin tyres instead of Pirellis, we've got bigger brakes at the front. No MagneRide in this car, so this just has the passive standard dampers, not the adaptive ones, but obviously the big change is we've got about another 100 kilowatts and about another 100 Newton meters. However, delivered very differently, whereas obviously in the turbo we've kind of got a big fat mid-range thanks to the turbocharger and the boost. This has more of a straight line, naturally aspirated, more revs. You give it, the more power you get, but it's also a lot quicker. Quite a quick car around here. So it doesn't feel any different to drive. Well, it certainly sounds different. It's more enjoyable because of that noise. I feel like I've actually got better traction, which is due to that torque, I think. I reckon if you overlap the power and torque curves of the two cars at around 3,000 RPM, they'd be pretty similar, or even maybe more in the 2.3 high performance. So that corners like this, 3.5, 4,000 RPM, I reckon I've probably got more torque in the 4-cylinder, which is why, combined with the fact this has got more rubber and better rubber, I've actually got better traction mid-corner. But at the moment, I'm still leaving it in third, which is what I did with the 2.3 high performance. Even for the lap, I just left it in third pretty much the whole way around. Whereas this, I can probably go back to second in these tighter corners. So here we go. Yep, back to second. That's usable. Second works. Although it doesn't struggle to pull in third. Yeah, there we go. You couldn't do that in the 4-cylinder. The chassis balance is very similar, really. You've got that initial understeer. If I flick this car like that, it doesn't really rotate under brakes. Carry some brake in. And then if I pick up the throttle, I do just tend to get push, just tend to get understeer until it over rotates like that, and then it can go sideways. But the chassis balance is quite similar, even though this is heavier in the nose. It's probably counteracted a little bit by the Michelins instead of the Pirellis. That Pirelli is an older design, used to be on the Mustang V8s, but then these switched to Michelin Pilot Sport 4Ss when they did the 2018 update. So it gives it a little bit extra purchase. But let's try and throw this thing around a little bit. Let's hold third. There we go, into oversteer, back the other way, back the other way, fun car. Now we can hold a slide for much longer in this. There we go. Woo! There you go, it's got a fun chassis on it. Again, we talked about it with the 4-cylinder. Mustang can actually, if I drive it properly, get a bit of entry oversteer. There you go. And hold little slides in it. People look down on this car, all those silly memes about Mustangs crashing into crowds, but this proves that it's driver error, if anything, because I can make it oversteer, I can make it understeer, I can drive it neatly. This is a lot of fun, a lot of fun. I mean, the biggest change, obviously, between the 4-cylinder and the GT is this engine and the soundtrack, even if it was no quicker. Woohoo! It's just so much more enjoyable because you get that treat, you get that reward when you really rev it out. You got so many more revs to play with. Sounds so good. Still got plenty of torque, but the harder you rev it, the better it feels. So back to second for this last corner. There we go. Proper muscle car noise. Right, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room somewhat, which is the Mustang's racetrack stamina, the V8 anyway. We've had a couple of instances at Winton at the Bend where it can be basically one lap, if not one then two laps before the engine goes into what's called D-rate. It protects itself, which is good. It's good that it protects itself, but it restricts revs, restricts power, and won't let you change gear because the temps get out of control. But I've got to say, here today, it's going fine. It's all about cylinder head temp. If that gets up over about 100 degrees, it starts getting a little bit warm. But at the moment, even hooning around this track, it's a cool day, relatively short track. You don't have the massive, long, open throttle moments. So here, it's going pretty well. But the real question is, which is faster, V8 or 4-cylinder? So let's strap the helmet on, put the drift box on, and see how we go. The 2.3 high performance auto is really fast. It's 1 minute 7.9 second lap, easily quicker than the hot hatches we've tested so far. But the V8 GT's 1 minute 5.5 second time is amazing, going right to the pointy end of our leaderboard. The 2.3 litre high performance Mustang is a real surprise packet and definitely deserves more respect. The engine might lack a little bit of character, but that lap time is seriously impressive, and that's why it gets a track score of 8 out of 10. When it comes to going fast and having fun though, you can't beat the V8 GT. For it to do a 1:05.5 lap shows that Mustangs have no problems going around corners, and that's why it gets a track score of 8.5 out of 10.